Tyler Manion, thankful to be joined by DA Billy Joe Nelson Jr. and Laurie Baio. You might remember or have recognized these two folks from the Nicholas Kassotis trial that wrapped up just a few weeks ago in the Coastal Empire. Obviously, it was a high-profile case. We covered it a lot here on WTOC, as did some national media outlets, including Court TV. For those that don't remember, folks watching right now, this was a very graphic case, a very sad case where a woman was dismembered and murdered. When you're going through and prosecuting a case like this, Laurie, how is it emotionally when you're dealing with such fragile details?
It's not easy. I think people are oftentimes mistaken. They think that prosecutors, law enforcement in general, don't feel some of the things that maybe the average person would feel. We absolutely do. And it's incredibly important to make sure that when we communicate with the family, friends, witnesses, that you keep that in mind, which is why it was such a focus for us to be careful with the photographs in this case.
DA Nelson, obviously, as your office is leading this kind of a prosecution and you are overseeing evidence like this that is so vivid and graphic and horrible to look at, how do you go about being delicate with that, but also realizing that that might play to your advantage with the jury for them to see really what happened to this poor woman?
So it's something that we have to balance through the course of a trial. You want to tell the full story by showing a jury all of the relevant evidence. So in a case like this, you did have very, very graphic, detailed photographs. You had some really gruesome facts that were involved. We have to make sure that we're telling a full picture and a full story to the jury to make sure that they get the feeling of what exactly happened in a case like this, because otherwise it's really not fair to the whole process. It's very important to go through all of the evidence that's relevant and to be mindful also, though, that you do have family members of a victim that are also watching what's going on. The last memories of Mindy Medman in this case that we wanted the world to see and her family to see were not these photographs. She was a beautiful, young, vibrant young lady. So while telling the story, we also take into account the effects that it'll have long term on some of the other people involved.
Leading up to a trial like this, I know we all met several years ago at a preliminary hearing inside one of those courtrooms out there, and we're talking about the case at that point. As it develops and you're building your case against Nicholas Kassotis here, what is the strategy like, Laurie, about how you build that case?
So I think it's not different on any trial. Essentially, I've had the luxury of 2+ years of preparing and reviewing and going through each and every painful step taken by law enforcement to collect as much possible evidence as possible. But all of that is a giant amount of evidence to ask a jury in a very short period of time to digest, to understand, and to process. So it was incredibly important for me to try and figure out, one, how to tell the story, and to tell it in a fashion that explained to the jury why there was sufficient evidence to prove each and every one of the elements of the crimes that were charged. So when drafting the indictment, I think it started there. The indictment was drafted to tell the story. And so the story started with each and every one of the crimes in the order that they occurred. And so chronologically, this case made the most sense to go from start to finish based on how the investigators came to the same conclusion that Nicholas Kassotis committed the crimes. And I believe that the jury was able to come to their own conclusions following the path of evidence that law enforcement followed to come to the same conclusion.
In our interview, just like this one with the defense attorney here, he mentioned that in his belief this was circumstantial evidence, obviously, which you can convict on and build a case on, but that he believed there wasn't exactly that smoking gun. There wasn't exactly something definitively a murder weapon. As you're building a case around that with so-called circumstantial evidence, how is that different, and how do you deal with that in this case in particular to make sure that that jury can still see the facts as you're perceiving them?
Well, so in every case, it would be wonderful if I had a crime committed on either a video evidence or with an eyewitness that's going to come forward and say, I saw the defendant commit X act. We did not have that in this case, but I do believe that the evidence, although circumstantial, was incredibly compelling and very overwhelming in volume. Nicholas Kassotis purchased the exact knife type that was found at the crime scene. It was literally purchased 8:46 in the morning, and we had evidence of the FBI tracking. The CAS team, Special Agent Bernie from the FBI, went through all of the phone records to be able to track his purchase of the knife from his home to Home Depot, all the way down to where her body was discovered and recovered, the knife present at that location, and then him coming back. He had absolutely no ties to that area. He had no reason to be there. And then all of the evidence that came in surrounding that just further substantiated each and every one of those allegations as to why would Nicholas Kassotis be exactly where her remains were found.
So you felt as though you had the evidence and you just needed to present it a specific way. I'm curious as to, obviously don't have the mind of a prosecutor, a lot of our audience doesn't. When you do have evidence that you feel strongly provides a good context, how do you go about building your argument in this case to ensure you get a conviction?
So all the people that know me that are friends and family would probably say I talk a lot. I bounce things off of people. I run them past people. I try to find non-attorney friends, family. I talk to my parents. I talk to my nieces. I talk to my coworkers. I probably talk more than I should. But I do it because lots of people don't know the case. And so if I am constantly explaining the state's theory, they can tell me what holes they see. They can tell me what things don't make sense to them or what things need to be further explained. My other half probably hears more about my cases than anybody.
Yeah.
So he is a great sounding board.
And Dean Nelson, as your office is preparing these, obviously you have your prosecutors that are going to go out and do this work. What is the level of cooperation and teamwork like within the office? Obviously, as I'm sure you're one of the people that are getting these ideas bounced off of.
We pride ourselves in the Atlantic Judicial Circuit in our office in being a team-oriented office. This case, probably more so than any other I've ever seen, truly exhibited that. It was all hands on deck. We had people all the way from our office manager, all the way up to myself and everybody in between. We knew the importance of this case, just like every case we have, how important it was to make sure that we did everything that we could to seek justice in this case. But across the circuit, we had people pitching in and helping, and that's just part of the environment that we have with our office. If ADA Baio needed something, she didn't hesitate to ask. I hesitate to name names because I would forget somebody inevitably. But within our office, and then also outside of our office with the law enforcement agencies that were involved, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI Regional Crime Lab, the Coastal Lab in Pooler, the Liberty County Sheriff's Office, Georgia State Patrol, FBI, you name it, DNR. There's so many agencies that pitched in to help tackle this task because this was a big case. And by big, I don't just mean the circumstances surrounding it and the trial itself. Just the nature of the facts were so hard to grasp because you went for so long without even knowing who this person was that was found. So there were so many moving parts and so many people that helped to make sure that justice was achieved, and thankfully we were able to do that.
When we look back at the trial that was, one of the seminal moments in a case, if a defendant takes the stand, is always when the defendant takes the stand. Nicholas Kassotis gets up there in his own defense. What were you strategically thinking as that happened, that you needed to get out of your cross there?
So when a defendant chooses to testify, that in and of itself is usually uncommon. It's not usually in a defendant's best interest to testify, and as a result, more often than not, defense attorneys are able to convince their client that that's probably not in their best interest. Mr. Kassotis was particularly interesting in that he himself was an attorney and a former prosecutor. So it didn't seem prudent from my perspective to get into kind of an argument contest with him. That was not going to be productive, and it's also not appropriate. But what I was hoping to accomplish was to get him to admit as much of the evidence as I could that he could not dispute. So he admitted to purchasing the knife. He admitted that it was him on the surveillance video. He admitted it was his vehicle, that he was the operator of the vehicle, that he drove the car, that it wasn't somebody else that had stolen his car or something of that nature, that somebody stole his wallet, but in fact that it was him. So at that point, once he admitted that all of those pieces of the puzzle were him, it then left the jury with only a very small decision, in my opinion. And that was simply, did he do it? Because all of the circumstantial evidence that we were saying demonstrated it, he basically admitted to.
In a case like this, I'm also curious. Obviously, it's going to elicit quite an emotional response from folks as you're talking about the graphic and violent nature of the crimes that were committed, whether by the defendant or by someone else. As you take into account the jury's emotions, how are you trying to prioritize the facts and make sure that they don't have a reasonable doubt beyond just that emotional reaction that can come with something like this?
So the criminal justice system is about justice. And so good, bad, or indifferent, all of the evidence comes in. That's my perspective on it. I know there are lots of other prosecutors that may feel differently, and each one of us has our own trial strategies. I'm sure lots of people watching could have tried this case differently than I did, or that Mr. McConnell and I did together, because he had different thoughts on certain things and we bounced them off of each other to figure out what we thought would be the most effective. It was important when we reviewed the evidence to figure out what evidence proved which elements. We did not focus a great deal on the images. We felt that that would have been disrespectful to Mindy and to her family and to her name and to her honor. But we showed enough of the photographs to be able to show the elements of the crime that were necessary. I mean, there was a charge for the dismemberment. There was a charge for her remains being removed from the location or being moved about and strewn. So those were things I had to prove, but we didn't harp on that and we didn't stay focused on that. We stayed focused on what evidence proved that Nicholas Kassotis had both means, opportunity, motive, and was present for those acts. And so that's what the focus was.
After you go through the entire argument, and Dan Nelson, maybe this is a question more for you, the maybe not pressure is the best word, but the build-up to a verdict and then a sentence. How are you feeling in those moments? And then right after, when you do get the conviction and then you get the maximum sentence?
So I was there for the entire trial. I sat on the front row, right behind the prosecution table, behind ADA Baio and Chief ADA McConnell. Mindy's family was behind me on the next row. There is no way to describe the emotion and the feeling that you have when you're waiting on a jury verdict. A lot of prosecutors will say, and I do believe this, the day that you're not nervous about a verdict is probably the day you should stop doing this job. Yeah. Because no matter how strong your evidence is, jurors sometimes are unpredictable. So you don't know how cases are always going to turn out. This case, I felt very comfortable that the evidence was overwhelming and more than sufficient to get a guilty verdict in this case. I think that our team did a fantastic job, everyone that was involved. So when the case went to the jury, I was comfortable we would get a guilty verdict. When we found out that a verdict had been reached, as in any other case, I was nervous. There was some anxiety that set in, but to hear the announcement from the clerk of court that the jury did reach that guilty verdict was overwhelming in a way because of the magnitude of the case, but at the same time, it's so deeply satisfying to see a victim receive the justice they deserve, and the victim's family, knowing that Mr. and Miss Mebane and her family members and friends cared so much about her and were there every step of the way during the trial. To see them finally have that moment where they can exhale is something that you really cherish in this job, because that's what this is about. It's not about us. It's about getting justice for victims and their families.
The appeal filed the day after, right? Very quickly. I know this is a sensitive subject, as obviously there will be ongoing litigation with an appeal here, but what can you say, Laurie, about the confidence your team has in the case you put on and that standing up in an appellate court?
So I think, again, it comes with perspective, right? So if you're not a prosecutor or you're not a criminal defense attorney or have family and friends in the field, you think, oh my goodness, right away. It's very common. Every murder case, there's generally an appellate process. It is always comes almost immediately thereafter. There's sometimes some small delay, but it's inevitable. So I'm not at all surprised, nor are any of us surprised that it has come. The way Georgia law works, it will go directly, right now, the law says it will go directly to the Georgia Supreme Court. That's not unique. That is every murder case. That said, it was important to Chief ADA McConnell and I to be very careful, but no different than any other trial, to be careful with the appellate record, to make sure that all of the things that need to be preserved are said on the record, and not all of those things are always said in front of a camera. Very often those are going to be sidebars or bench conferences or things that are said when the jury's not present, preserving the record. I believe we all, Mr. Weinstein included, did a very prudent job being careful with the record and being sure that everything was said to protect Mr. Kassotis' right, because at the time we didn't have a verdict. So it just as easily could have been a scenario where we were preserving the appeal, Mr. Weinstein on behalf of his own client, or the state on behalf of the victims. And I do want to point out that although Mrs. And Mr. Mebane lost their daughter Mindy, who is no question the most pronounced victim in this case, she wasn't the only victim in this case. And so there are now still living, breathing people that are dealing with the aftermath of Mr. Kassotis. So the feelings on an appeal go beyond just Mr. and Mrs. Mebane, but to all of the people that had to testify as part of this trial. So I think that's important to recognize, because it's not over for them yet either.
Yeah, and it's got to be something that requires, I have to imagine, a good amount of courage to get up there on that stand in a case that has cameras all over the courtroom, that you know is being broadcasted all over the country. Really, that has to take something as well.
I don't think any of them were thrilled. I don't think anybody is thrilled with the idea of being cross-examined or to be telling very personal, intimate details to anyone, no less the world. And to be fair, the internet is not always kind. And so there was not only just a rolling screen of the trial, but rolling commentary. And some of it, hits home and hurts. Whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, people don't like to hear those things. So I give them the utmost praise for taking the stand and doing the very unpleasant job that they had to do.
Is there anything else about this trial that we haven't covered that either of you want to add here?
There is something I would like to add, and I think me and Laurie probably have the same thoughts here. I mentioned what a collaborative team effort went into this case, and I can't stress that enough. Not just folks within our office. The ADAs involved, victim advocates, administrative assistants, investigators, everybody really put forth the effort that was needed to see this case through. But more importantly for me, the law enforcement agencies involved, the Region 5 Field Office for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation based out of Statesboro, they were tasked with this case based on the fact that it originated in Liberty County. That's one of the counties that they cover when they are requested to come in and help with a case. Special Agent Tracy Sands was the lead agent on this case. We could not have accomplished this as a team without Tracy Sands. He was, as I've stated previously to a few people, he was the glue that held this together. He's one of the best agents I have ever seen or worked with in my career as a prosecutor, and so many people feel the same way. And as your network has covered, he did recently pass away, which is so tragic because he was so proud of getting justice for Mindy's family and the outcome in this trial, yet he didn't want any of the credit. Never once did he take credit for one thing in this case. He was so humble, selfless, but he was an absolute technician as an investigator, and he did such a good job in this case, and I can't stress that enough, how thankful we are for the time that we were able to know him and work with him, particularly on this case, and I think a lot of the response in the wake of his passing from other people have really echoed that. So I did just want to take a moment to remember him and thank him for the work that he did on this. Special Agent in Charge Lindsay Smith, who is in charge of that office at Region 5, she was excellent in helping to coordinate a lot of the moving parts. Special Agent Brett Dickerson, who did the bulk of the crime scene analysis as a crime scene specialist. Special Agent Christian Johnson. Again, the names can go on, but our job in seeking justice is one that we cannot accomplish without the great work of the law enforcement agents. And also Investigator Jack Frost, who currently works with our office, who worked with Liberty County Sheriff's Office at the time. They put so much effort into this, and we're just so thankful for the work that they did, and I know that the Mebane family is thankful for that as well.
Anything else, Laurie?
We just couldn't have done this without Special Agent Sands. I've been a prosecutor since 1996. I've never worked with anyone who has been this dedicated, committed, and thorough. He had an interview with Nicholas Kassotis in Pennsylvania when he was first arrested, and he didn't rest on the information that they had recovered. He went back and double-checked everything that Mr. Kassotis said to try and either prove or disprove his theories. That's what justice is about, and Tracy Sands was absolutely an arbiter of justice. That's what he did, and I am proud to have worked with him.
And his legacy is preserved through this verdict, right?
I do hope that the new members of law enforcement, GBI, local staff, will have the opportunity to go back and to watch some of this. If there's any kind of compelling benefit to the fact that this case was on trial and recorded, it's that other agents will have the ability to watch how Tracy did things.
Thank you both for your time talking to us today. I really appreciate it. Going through what I know was a difficult case and kind of debriefing it with us, I'm sure the audience appreciates it as well. So
Sure.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.